Plissken? Plissken, what are you doing?
Playing with myself. I'm going in.
You gonna kill me now, Snake?
I'm too tired. Maybe later.
Released in 1981, Escape from New York exploded like a cinematic nightmare, drawing audiences into a dark future where Manhattan, the once brightly shining heart of freedom, had collapsed and been transformed into a gigantic prison holding all American criminals. Scorched avenues, ruined buildings, and insane gangs turned the iconic island into an inescapable hell. Amidst that chaos, Air Force One, carrying the U.S. president, was struck down by terrorists in the heart of New York, plunging the entire nation into a life-or-death moment. With no way back, the government was forced to play its last card. Snake Plissken, a notorious outlaw, an untamed warrior with a blood-stained past. In just 24 hours, he had to plunge into the death zone, navigating through the treacherous prison city to rescue the president. Every step Snake took was a test amidst violence, betrayal, and death constantly lurking. However, the on-screen intensity was just the beginning. The behind-the-scenes of Escape from New York was filled with incredibly horrifying stories. A deadly scene hastily set up in a cramped garage, a professional wrestler nearly losing his life to a real spiked bat, and even the entire city once in an uproar over rumors of a plane crash in the center. The press at the time exploded, residents panicked, and the film crew struggled to survive amidst the storm of public opinion. And that's just the tip of the nightmare. Now, prepare yourselves, because this video will immerse you deep into the 20 darkest secrets behind Escape from New York. 1. That abandoned city was never truly gone. When you watch Escape from New York, you believe you're staring at a future Manhattan in decay. Empty avenues, skyscrapers dark as hollow eye sockets in a dying giant. New York is no longer the center of civilization. It has become a sealed prison island in the heart of America. But the truth was far smaller. John Carpenter didn't have the budget to destroy a real city, so he and his crew built one inside a warehouse. Foam concrete blocks, miniature high-rises, streets painted in layers of gray and black. Reflective tape lined the edges of windows so that under low lighting and drifting smoke, the camera would transform it into something vast and terrifying. A tiny world, shoot carefully, made monstrous. And here's the strange part. That city didn't disappear when production wrapped. It was preserved, transported, reborn. Just a year later, the same skeletal model resurfaced in Blade Runner, directed by Ridley Scott. The gray prison wasteland was repainted in neon. Rain fell endlessly. Billboards glowed. Cyberpunk replaced collapse. Manhattan the prison became Los Angeles 2019. Two dystopians, two completely different cinematic visions, one shared backbone. And somewhere in the shadows of those miniature buildings, a young artist was quietly learning how to build entire worlds of his own. 2. The painter of a dying city who would later build oceans and planets. In 1981, on the set of Escape from New York, few people noticed the young matte painter hunched over enormous background canvases. His name was James Cameron. At the time, he wasn't a box office titan. He was simply responsible for illusion, painting abandoned skylines, flickering windows, endless darkness stretching beyond the physical set. It was quiet work, meticulous, patient. But that job sharpened something far more powerful than technique: the ability to imagine entire worlds at scale. Within a few years, the man who once painted ruined Manhattan created the Terminator, then escalated into epic sci-fi warfare with aliens. He made global audiences weep with Titanic, and later constructed a fully realized alien ecosystem in Avatar. From foam skyscrapers in a dim warehouse to oceans, spacecraft, and bioluminescent forests, the foundation was laid in near invisibility. But if Cameron's story is one of ambition rising, the story of another actor in the film borders on something far stranger, a private political mythology that never made it to the screen. 3. The American president with the soul of a British gentleman. In Escape from New York, the President of the United States was played by Donald Pleasence, already famous for portraying Dr. Loomis on Halloween. But Pleasence didn't just memorize lines, he rewrote history. In his private backstory, America in the film had collapsed and fallen back under British influence, led by Margaret Thatcher. The on-screen president was, in his imagination, an English aristocrat installed as a political puppet. None of this appears in the script, yet it explains his unmistakable British accent and the subtle detachment in his performance, as if the character belonged to a different power structure entirely. This wasn't just immersion, it was audacity, inventing an alternate geopolitical history to deepen a character in a dystopian action film. And if that eccentric boldness feels almost amusing, another filming location tied to the movie would prove far more unsettling. Because unlike the miniature city, that devastation reflected something very real. 4. The ending scene wasn't shot on a soundstage, but right in the director's garage. In the script, Maggie, the brave woman who fought alongside Snake, fell heroically. But after completing the main shoot, John Carpenter was shocked to discover a loophole. There was no scene of Maggie's body, which made the film's narrative lack a necessary conclusion. Time and budget were running out, and he couldn't rebuild the Silver Cup Bridge set. The solution came in an unexpected way. Carpenter brought the entire minimalist crew to his home garage. Adrienne Barbeau, his real-life wife and the actress playing Maggie, lay down on the cold concrete floor, motionless like a corpse. A handheld camera panned over, makeshift lights shone down, and thus the crucial scene was born in a cramped, ordinary space. That shot sealed Maggie's fate, but also opened up a legendary anecdote about Carpenter's daring. And if an ordinary garage could be transformed into the setting for a fateful moment, then the recklessness in an action scene almost cost a life on set. 5. A blow with a real spiked bat almost cost the famous wrestler his life. In the fiery arena of Escape from New York, Snake Plissken faces off against a giant, armed with violence and gore. John Carpenter didn't choose an ordinary stuntman, but invited professional wrestler Ox Baker, famous for his menacing demeanor and brutal fighting style. The climactic scene is when Kurt Russell has to use a spiked baseball bat to attack Baker directly. The chilling part is that the bat was not fake at all. The spikes were still on the bat, and Baker was only protected by a thin piece of wood hidden under his shirt. With just a small error, a spike could easily pierce through, ending his decades-long career or even his life. Yet they charged at each other, resulting in a breathtaking fight scene, both wild and terrifyingly realistic. As the cheers on screen faded, in real life, an entire city was gripped by panic due to a seemingly harmless staged scene. 6. The press once panicked, mistakenly believing a plane had crashed right in the city center. Suddenly, one day you wake up and breaking news saturates newspapers and radio waves. A huge plane has just crashed in the heart of St. Louis. Residents frantically rush into the streets, fire truck sirens blare, police cars block all roads. Hundreds of people pour out like a swarm of bees, discussing loudly, some weeping, believing they had relatives on the flight, others stunned silent, reading disaster-filled headlines. Witnesses recount the scene of the plane exploding as it plunged into the city. In reality, it was all a surreal staging by the Escape from New York film crew. They had purchased an old plane wreck all the way from Arizona, cut it into pieces, and transported it to St. Louis. Then they erected it in the middle of the street, adding smoke, lights, and a pile of shattered metal. The scene was so real that not only residents, but also the press were fooled, publishing articles as if a national tragedy had just occurred. For a few days, the entire city was caught up in a manufactured nightmare brought by Hollywood. But for Russell to have the opportunity to turn Snake into a legend, he first had to overcome a harsh hurdle from the studio, where completely different names almost stole the role. 7. The lead role almost went to Chuck Norris and Tommy Lee Jones. In the early 80s, Kurt Russell was still strongly associated with the image of a kind, innocent Disney kid, specializing in lighthearted family films. When John Carpenter nominated him for the role of Snake Plissken, a notorious, defiant, and dangerous criminal, the studio immediately rejected it. In the eyes of the producers, Russell could never transform into a dark, cold icon. Instead, they leaned towards safer choices. Chuck Norris, a rising muscular martial arts star, or Tommy Lee Jones, a rugged face who had made a strong impression in tough guy roles. But Carpenter was persistent. He believed only Russell had enough arrogance and depth to embody Snake. After many tense arguments, Carpenter won. When the film was released, all doubts vanished. Russell shot to stardom, and Snake Plissken became one of the greatest anti-heroes in cinematic history. A role deemed impossible turned into a legendary turning point, elevating Russell to action star status for an entire decade. At this very moment, Kurt Russell made a different choice to protect Snake Plissken's cool demeanor. 8. Kurt Russell adamantly refused a detail that could have turned Snake into a mockery. In the original draft, John Carpenter wrote a scene where Snake completes his mission, walks nonchalantly, and flicks a cigarette butt directly into the president's face as a gesture of absolute contempt. On paper, it could have created a rebellious punchline. But upon reading the script, Kurt Russell immediately objected. To him, that detail turned Snake into a cheap cowboy, ruining the cool demeanor the character represented. Russell fought fiercely, asserting that Snake didn't need ridiculous actions to express his defiance. It was his silence, sharp gaze, and slow gait that instilled a lasting impression. John Carpenter finally agreed, removing that detail and preserving Snake's ultimate cool image, both mysterious and defiant, yet never crude. But the irony of ironies, the film named New York hardly touched the city itself. 9. The film is titled New York, but only has one real scene in New York. Audiences going to the cinema in 1981 believed they were about to see a ruined Manhattan transformed into a giant prison. However, the entire New York in the film was actually constructed from St. Louis and Los Angeles. A previous fire had burned down many neighborhoods in St. Louis, leaving behind scorched, dilapidated buildings, a perfect setting for a desolate city that required little staging. Only one scene, where the camera pans past the Statue of Liberty, was actually filmed in real New York. The rest, from the dark avenues to the dangerous bridge, were all meticulously disguised. A film named New York, yet hardly setting foot in the city. That was a paradox that both astonished Hollywood and made them admire Carpenter's daring. And that daring was even more evident in a seemingly small detail that no one expected. The chilling opening voice came from a familiar face in horror films. 10. That chilling opening voice turned out to be from a familiar scream queen. From the very first seconds, you hear a cold female voice echoing, describing how New York has been sealed off and turned into a giant prison. That voice evokes a shiver, dry as a death sentence. Yet few realize it is Jamie Lee Curtis, the star of Halloween, the Scream Queen who once made the whole world tremble at the hands of Michael Myers. Carpenter invited Curtis to do the voiceover as a silent tribute. Though not appearing on screen, Her voice opened the door, leading the audience into Snake Plissken's dark world. But if that voice was merely a secret illusion, then a gun-filled opening scene was actually filmed, only to disappear completely before the film was released. 11. A grand bank robbery scene was completely deleted before the film's release. Initially, Escape from New York didn't open with Snake Plissken being escorted in prison, but with a chaotic bank robbery in the middle of the city. Snake and his accomplices stormed in, guns blazing, alarms blaring. Then the subway escape plan failed miserably. The scene was elaborately staged, enough to portray Snake as a daring and reckless criminal. However, during test screenings, audiences were not very enthusiastic. They found the scene cumbersome, drawn out, and slowing down the film's pace. Instead of adding drama, it diluted attention, making Snake's character less mysterious. Carpenter had to make a cold decision: cut the entire segment. Thanks to this, when Snake first appears, he is already a shadowy figure, a notorious name with an unclear past. That ambiguity turned Snake into a legend from the very first minute. And then, upon its release, audiences were magnificently tricked by the very image on the promotional poster. 12. The image of the Statue of Liberty's head lying in the street only existed on the poster. The promotional poster for Escape from New York sent shivers down millions of spines. In the middle of a New York avenue, the giant head of the Statue of Liberty lay strewn, surrounded by Snake and a fleeing crowd. It became one of the most iconic cinematic images of the 80s, instilling in audiences a sense of a devastated Manhattan never before seen. But upon entering the cinema, everyone was surprised. No scene in the film replicated that image. It all existed only on the poster, a marketing trick that disappointed but also deeply ingrained itself in public memory. It wasn't until nearly 3 decades later that Cloverfield, 2008, brought back the sight of the statue's head rolling through the streets, as if repaying a debt to audiences of yesteryear. If a poster could create a visual legend, then even the roaring sound of helicopter engines on screen hid an unexpected truth. 13. The roaring helicopters on screen actually came from real military forces. In the film, every time a helicopter appears, do you shiver at the rumbling sound and the dark shadow looming on screen? Many thought these were just models or sound effects, but in reality, those helicopters were real vehicles of the National Guard, mobilized to serve the film crew. Even more surprising, it was from this experience that John Carpenter developed a passion for helicopters. He spent time learning to fly and eventually became a real pilot. A detail that seemed minor during the filmmaking process ended up changing the entire life of the legendary director, transforming his on-screen obsession into a real-life passion. And if military aircraft astonished audiences, then the film crew's harsh shooting schedule created an equally terrifying night hell. 14. For months, the film crew only lived at night, from 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. The suffocating and gloomy atmosphere of Escape from New York wasn't due to special effects, but to a harsh reality. The entire film crew had to live completely in darkness. In St. Louis, the shooting schedule began at 6 p.m., just as the city lights came on, and lasted until 6 a.m. the next day. Every scene was filmed in thick darkness, filled with artificial smoke and flickering lights, recreating a deadly prison Manhattan. As dawn broke, the entire crew retreated. Immediately after, bulldozers and city workers were mobilized, clearing away fake plane wreckage, charred bricks, and debris to return the streets to normal life. Come evening, the cycle repeated, from a normal city transforming into a dystopian hell, then returning to its original state within hours. A dual rhythm of life, both real and illusory, made the entire crew feel as if they were trapped in the very film they were creating. In that thick darkness, even the main antagonist created a strange impression, making audiences shiver every time he appeared. 15. A notorious antagonist self-added a peculiar tick that made audiences shiver. Isaac Hayes, the king of soul music, when he took on the role of Duke, didn't want to simply embody a violent villain. In behind-the-scenes discussions, Hayes once proposed adding a small, nervous tick to the character. Whenever he encountered Snake Plissken, Duke's eyes would twitch slightly, as a sign of underlying instability. To him, even a small detail would be enough to make audiences shiver, finding Duke more dangerous and unpredictable. However, when the film was completed, this detail was almost not clearly visible on screen. It only existed as an acting intention sparked by Hayes, but was not made a highlight in the final cut. Nevertheless, that anecdote still shows how serious Hayes was about adding an extra layer of uneasy personality to the famous antagonist. And while Hayes added a peculiar tick, another veteran legend had to sacrifice his health to complete the role. 16. A spaghetti western legend had to film in pain after surgery. Lee Van Cleef, a name associated with spaghetti western masterpieces like The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, was invited by John Carpenter to play Sheriff Bob Hawke, who constantly struggles between authority and Snake's defiance. But when he stepped onto the set, Van Cleef was in poor health. He had just undergone knee surgery, had difficulty moving, and even standing for long periods was painful. Notably, the entire shooting schedule took place at night, continuously for many weeks. Every scene where Van Cleef had to stand giving orders, walk authoritatively, or turn around snarling was physical torture. But in front of the camera, audiences only saw a cold, majestic, and weighty commander. No one knew that behind those stern eyes, the veteran actor was silently enduring excruciating pain. This sacrifice transformed Van Cleef's character into a perfect foil for Snake, cold yet deep. And amidst that heavy atmosphere, a face associated with American politics unexpectedly appeared, making the entire film crew chuckle bitterly. 17. A script rejected for years for being too dark and violent. John Carpenter actually wrote Escape from New York in 1974, years before he became famous for Halloween. But when he shopped the script around, most studios flatly rejected it. They deemed it too dark, too violent, and unsuitable for audiences at the time. A future America transformed into a giant prison where crime and despair reigned. That was too chilling a vision for a film industry that still favored righteous heroes. It wasn't until after the success of Halloween and The Fog that Carpenter gained enough credibility to revive his old script. And this time, Avco Embassy agreed, paving the way for one of history's finest dystopian works to be born. Escape from New York became clear proof that ideas once considered too dark to film are sometimes the key to creating legends. 18. In a film about a kidnapped president, the son of a real-life president appeared. When Escape from New York was released, audiences not only saw Donald Pleasance as the kidnapped U.S. president, but also briefly glimpsed another face with an unexpected identity: Stephen Ford, son of President Gerald Ford, the 38th President of the United States. In the film, Stephen played only a Secret Service agent on Air Force One, appearing for a brief moment before the aircraft crashed. The irony lies in the fact that in a fictional film about the president being taken hostage by terrorists, the son of a real-life president was present in that very scene. It was an unintentional layer of sarcasm, where Hollywood and American politics intersected in a seemingly harmless frame. For the film crew, this was like a playful jab at fate, adding more anecdotes to the behind-the-scenes stories. And if that appearance was just a small illusion, then from the very beginning, the film was rejected. 19. The immortal character Snake Plissken was actually inspired by a real-life gangster. Snake Plissken sounds like a name out of a comic book or science fiction novel, but John Carpenter drew inspiration from real life. In high school, he once knew a taciturn gangster nicknamed Snake because he had a large snake tattoo on his arm. That man exuded a fierce, reckless, and defiant demeanor, enough to haunt Carpenter for years afterward. When writing the script for Escape from New York, he adopted that nickname for the main character, then dressed him in a cold armor and an iconic eye patch. From a real-life defiant individual, Snake Plissken became a legendary anti-hero on screen, living on in the audience's memory. A simple origin story transformed into an immortal symbol, concluding a series of secrets that make Escape from New York not just a film, but a legend intertwined with countless anecdotes. 20. The woman Snake met on the streets turned out to be Kurt Russell's real wife. Amidst the chaotic journey, Snake Plissken unexpectedly meets a woman in a small cafe, a fleeting character, yet leaving a strange impression. Few knew that this woman was Susan Hubley, Kurt Russell's real-life wife at the time. This was also her first role after giving birth to their son together, making the scene even more unique. This blending of screen and real life created a strange feeling. Snake, a cold outlaw, encountering his real-life partner. Audiences were unaware, but for Russell, perhaps that moment carried a distinct layer of emotion mixed between work and family. And if the screen could blend with real life, then Snake's character itself originated from a real-life figure. Escape from New York is a testament to John Carpenter's boundless audacity and creativity. The film presents a dystopian world that is both suffocating and captivating, immersing audiences from beginning to end. Snake